And now, Move the Sticks with Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks.
What's up, everybody? DJ Bucky here on Move the Sticks. And, Bucky, we got a weekend of the postseason now, and we've got a week coming up we're really looking forward to. But I thought on today's show, let's worry about the future another day. Let's look back and focus on what we saw in the first round of the playoffs. We're going to do that with just us. Then we're going to bring in Coach Billick a little bit later, as we always do, get his thoughts on some of the coaching movement we've already seen. And I don't know if we'll let TD in or not today. It's up in the air. You might see producer TD. You might not. You need to stick around to find out, Bucky. But let's start with these games. Let's just kind of work in the way in which they were played. So let's start with Kansas City and Houston. And when you look at this game, Buck, you try and find one reason and narrow it down why the Kansas City Chiefs were able to just completely dominate the Houston Texans. What would it be?
To me, I think they just did a great job on defense of making Brian Hoyer show that he was a double agent. He turns the ball over. He plays for both teams. He didn't play well for the Texans. He obviously played really well for the Chiefs. And anytime you can force a quarterback to play that bad, it certainly plays to your favor. I think that is the biggest reason why the Kansas City Chiefs were able to win. They knocked Brian Hoyer around, and he gave up the ball.
I look at this Chiefs defense in this football game. It stuck out to me is that they have difference makers at all three levels of their defense. We often talk about blue chip players or blue players, which are Pro Bowl caliber players when you're putting the magnets up on the wall and looking at a roster. They have those blue guys at each and every level, and we saw it in this game. I thought up front they dominated. I know Dwayne Brown not being there was a big factor with the pass rush, but I thought inside pass rush, off the edges. Then you look at what they did in coverage with their linebackers was outstanding as well. And then you look in the back end, they made plays. But you touched on the double agent there in Brian Hoyer, and to me, look at he just no confidence, doesn't trust his eyes, limited vision, and then this pick. But what's he looking at here?
You know, he absolutely stared him down. He did a poor job of like reading the coverage of the defense and really working his eyes to get those guys off the spot. He just played like a rookie, and I'm surprised because he's been in the league a long time. For him to play like that in the postseason was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, you look at the defense here for the Chiefs, their numbers quite impressive. You know, look, you pitch a shutout, you're doing something right. No, they gave up no yardage. They were outstanding in this game. To me, their defense was the number one story, but Brian Hoyer, number two, the reason why this game was lost for the Houston Texans, just how awful he was, had a fumble as well. And Bucky, to me, the better quarterback, I believe you look at each and every game we've had in the postseason, won.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we talk about it being a quarterback league. I don't think Houston, I know how talented their roster is. Even if they're, Arian Foster and Dwayne Brown, all those guys are healthy. When you have a quarterback playing like this, you got no shot.
Oh, I think he absolutely makes them go back and find a quarterback in the draft. Brian Hoyer made too many mistakes. Look, we could talk about him being a game manager. That was supposedly his biggest asset. But you look here, stares the receiver down, is trying to hit the angle route to Alfred Blue, throws it right to the chest of Malga. This can't happen in the playoffs because, look, points are at a premium. To turn the ball over when you're resting at the 5-yard line is unacceptable. And I really think it sheds the light on the inefficiencies and the ineptitude that they have at the quarterback position. I absolutely expect the Houston Texans to go in the draft and find a quarterback that gives them an opportunity to win at a high level because they have pieces on the outside that can get it done. But they just don't have the quarterback, and that's the missing link for them.
And I'd like to take back that whole game manager label. We tries to give Brian Hoyer that game manager, which to me is if you're limited physically, we call him a game manager. That was horrible game management. You want to talk about a game manager who was playing for the Kansas City Chiefs and Alex Smith, who made plays with his legs, made good decisions. That, to me, was the game manager in a complimentary sense. Brian Hoyer, let's take that tag off of him.
He's marginal. He came into the league viewed as a backup, and I think the more he plays, the more we see that is what he is. He can give you a shot in the arm for maybe a 2 or 3 game stint, but to think about this guy being your long-term answer at the position, I just don't think it is possible. It's feasible. I think Bill O'Brien now clearly understands that he has to get a quarterback. They've ignored a position for 2 years. I think he has to go and get one now.
Yeah, I think they're definitely going to be in the quarterback market. We talk about it all the time, Bucky. A lot of times you get in these big games, they're lost more so than they're won.
Absolutely.
And
more games are lost than won. Marty Schottenheimer used to tell me that when I was in Kansas City. I continue to see it, especially in the playoffs. Turnovers, situational football, all those things come up and they rear its ugly head at those critical moments, which is why some teams are able to advance and others are going home.
All right, well, that was a butt kicking in that game. A game that was much closer and just maybe the most bizarre playoff game that I've ever seen. The Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals, Buck. And before we get to the kind of implosion that took place with Cincinnati at the end of this football game, to me, the big reason why the Steelers won. Take the other stuff at the end of the game off the table. Ryan Shazier, as much as we want to talk about the offensive side and Big Ben and Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant doing a somersault catch, Ryan Shazier, when it was time to make a play in this football game, he delivered. He was their dynamic playmaker, get the ball out, turn the football over. He did it in clutch moments, and to me, he's kind of that difference maker for them that they sorely need on the defensive side of the ball if they're going to make a deep run in the postseason.
Hey, look, he played outstanding. Young fella stepped up. He was all over it. This, to me, was the biggest play of the game. That hit on Giovanni Bernard led to a turnover, but it set the tone. Now, I don't understand why it wasn't a penalty, the way he ducked his head and kind of speared him up under the chin. But when you look at that ratcheted up the emotions. This play here was outstanding too. Knowing that you have to get the ball back, gave them new life, gave them another opportunity. Big Ben was able to lead it down the field. Ryan Shazier was the MVP for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Look at his stat line. 13 tackles, 2 TFLs, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. It doesn't get much better than that. I know we had shown the clip before this game about I talked about big brother, little brother with the Steelers and the Bengals, the more physical football team. And we saw, remember, he almost knocked himself out after that interception in the previous meeting. And in this game, he ends up knocking out Gio Bernard. So it was a very, very physical football game. And I thought Ryan Shazier was kind of the catalyst to get this thing turned around after it got away from him there in Pittsburgh for the Steelers. But, look, we got to focus on the obvious and that implosion at the end of the game. And I want to give you credit. I wish I had printed it out because your article, it got some run on social
Twitter,
media. So Bucky previewed the game on NFL.com, and literally you were like Miss Chloe. Spell it out. You even said the names of the players that could potentially cost the Cincinnati Bengals a football game. You talked about Adam Pac-Man Jones. You talked about Vontaze Burfict being emotional guys, and sometimes they can't control their emotions, and they need to be careful in this football game. You're a prophet.
I mean, it's just amazing. Like, under pressure, most of the time your true character shows up. And, I will say this. I felt like the Cincinnati Bengals, for the most part, defensively did a great job of knocking them around and played well. And, look, Vontaze Burfict, if not for that penalty at the end, you talk about his stat line is equally impressive. 11 tackles. I want to say he had a couple sacks. There you see the interception, a forced fumble. He was all over the field. This play right here, I understand he's trying to separate Antonio Brown from the ball if he was able to bring it down. It's a bang-bang play, but he has to know that he is always a target. He cannot put himself in that position. Even though he played what I think is like a premier game, like a 5-star game, that penalty gave the Pittsburgh Steelers life, particularly when Big Ben couldn't throw the ball down the field. He gave them an opportunity to put themselves in a position to make a field goal, and it ultimately cost them the game. And then the Pac-Man Jones thing, look, I understand Joey Porter should not be on the field. He shouldn't be there. Pac-Man Jones has to keep his cool in that game. Allow them to sustain a drive where you give them 30 yards in penalties. Look, they were a team that were 6 in defensive penalties coming into the game. I worried about the personal fouls because I saw it happen in previous games. It showed its ugly head the last 2 minutes of the game. Cost them a football game.
Yeah, to me, the word is poise. And we use poise often when we talk about quarterbacks. I've often said that's the most important trait of a quarterback is having poise. But it really goes throughout your whole football team. In big moments, you have to show some poise, and I just thought this Cincinnati Bengals team completely lost their poise. It reminded me of when I was in Baltimore. We lost a playoff game to the Tennessee Titans, and we had Orlando Brown, Zeus, who was a very emotional guy. And at a key moment in that football game, they kind of baited him defensively, kind of gave him a little chippiness after the play. He pushes, I think it was Van den Bosch, pushes him. He flops down, costs us 15 yards. It was a huge, huge play. But they knew he was a target. He's an emotional guy, and they went after him, try and bait him, and it worked. And I thought Joey Porter, who had no business being on the field, no question, he should not have been out there. I don't want to get that misunderstood. He had no business being out there. But he knew who to go up to. He went up to Pac-Man and baited him, and sure enough, it worked.
I mean, and I felt like it was that kind of game. The funny thing is for all of the calls for Marvin Lewis's head for having his team supposedly out of control, I think you just as easily could have made the case for the Pittsburgh Steelers the same way. Coaches getting penalties, a personal foul penalty on Mike Munchak, unsportsmanlike conduct. There you see Joey Porter on the field at the end of the game. This is a very chippy rivalry. Obviously, you spent time in the AFC North. You understand the intensity. I just felt like we saw it play out in front of us. We got some of the nastiness, but I understood it was going to be like that. You just hate to see it if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan. Your team come unraveled in a game that I think you like to say that you should have won because A.J. McCarron made a big play to A.J. Green. They did enough to win the game, just didn't get it done. So now they have to rest on that for the entire offseason.
By the way, 30 years from now, Landry Jones to his grandkids, big playoff game, led the Steelers to a big win over the Cincinnati Bengals.
How about that?
He did play in that game, don't forget. All right, let's move over to the NFC and a matchup. Again, you talk about a bizarre ending to a football game. Seattle Seahawks, Minnesota Vikings, Bucky. And if you're looking for one reason, let's start with the positives here. Let's not focus on the missed field goal out the gate. But a positive reason why the Seattle Seahawks won this football game, what would you go with?
I would say the Seattle Seahawks won because they were resilient. They were gritty. They were tough. They have a championship pedigree, and I think that pedigree allowed them to sustain themselves when they were down 9-0 in the fourth quarter. The fact that they were able to get up off the mat and make enough plays to get it done, I think it's a testament and a credit to Pete Carroll. He always talks about winning the fourth quarter, that it doesn't matter how you start, it's how you finish. Ultimately, the Seattle Seahawks were able to finish the game. And look, it's not necessarily textbook. It wasn't a pretty game on the surface, but they made enough plays. Russell Wilson being able to make plays inside and outside the pocket, being able to get those timely stops and those key turnovers when they were able to get them on defense. It's improbable that they were able to win a game that they were really dominated for most of the game, but they found a way to get it done. I think that is about finding a way to hang in there. They were able to do that. Hats off to them.
Yeah, big plays and look at what offensively Russell Wilson, that was fantastic. But to me, the fumble on Adrian Peterson, when you look right here, KJ Wright kind of holds him up and Cam Chancellor rips the ball out. Hey, hats off to Collinsworth, by the way, because he did point out the fact when you see the replay, look at how he's holding that football, Bucky. He does not have any grip on the point of the football to secure it. That's just high school fundamentals right there that got away from Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, I did think the high school fundamentals got away from him, but I also think he was probably prevented from being able to get a full grip on the ball because KJ Wright had that other arm, could never necessarily nestle it in and tuck it high and tight like you want to see. But
even high and tight, just get the tip of the football. He's holding the base of the football. That's not –
no, it's not. It's
football 101.
It's not what you would teach, like a Pop Warner guy, a high school guy. You would think that Adrian Peterson can do it, but, like, he has had fumble issues, and some of that comes into play. We've seen it a couple times. Now we saw it in this game. We saw it in the championship game a few years ago. He gives up the ball, and so defenders know that. They have that knowledge. They're always going to search it out.
All right, how about this play, though, by Russell Wilson? The ball's on the ground. To me, the pop-up slide with his baseball background came into play. Slides, picks it up. Then it's a three-part deal. It's, number one, to be able to slide to get the football. You see him not looking right there. Ball gets snapped. The awareness to slide and pick it up, that's the first challenge. Next challenge, Munderland's coming in untouched. To make him miss, that's the second thing he's got to do. And then third of all, get your eyes upfield. Most quarterbacks just try and throw the ball away, save the down. He was able to not only save the down, but to get a big chunk play to Tyler Lockett. I mean, that was ridiculous.
Oh, I mean, it's a ridiculous play. It's one of those things, but we saw it. We saw it in the bowl game, Stanford versus Iowa. Anytime the ball hits the ground, everyone
freaks out.
Everyone freezes, pauses. And so Russell Wilson had the wherewithal to pick up the ball and try to find a way to make something happen. Tyler Lockett stayed alive on the scramble drill. It wasn't ideal execution, but I still have to say it was great execution because they made something happen out of nothing, and people had their antennas up, made a play. That was a huge play in that game.
By the way, when you look at the end of this football game, and we have to touch on it, the missed field goal, felt bad for Blair Walsh, and just got to give him credit though. After the game, he was a man. He stood at his locker and answered every question that came his way.
He did answer every question. I give him hats off for being a guy that kind of stood up and did that. But I think it's unfortunate because it took away from what I thought was going to be kind of like a pivotal or seminal moment for Teddy Bridgewater. That drive allowed us to see did Teddy Bridgewater have the moxie to get it done. Yes, they were benefited from a penalty, but came right back on that play and hit Kyle Rudolph on an out on time. I think Teddy Bridgewater is growing. And look, the inclement conditions are not ideal for his skill set, but he was able to find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, look, and one more reason why they didn't win this football game for the Minnesota Vikings, if I had to narrow it down, not just a missed field goal, but to me just not finishing. Didn't finish drives, which resulted in some field goals early in this football game, and then obviously didn't finish the football game at the end. We see it time and time again. You can dominate a football game, you can handle a football game, but you've got to be able to finish drive, and you've got to be able to finish end of half, end of game, and this football team was unable to finish.
Yeah, you have to get sevens, not threes. You have to find a way to punch it in. They needed to score touchdowns when they had those opportunities very early in the game. Even though they moved up, I just felt like when you're only putting field goals on the board, you're 1 or 2 plays away from letting the other team back in it, and we saw that happen with Russell Wilson's play and also the turnover with Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, the turnover was huge. Anyways, feel bad for Blair Walsh. He's a good kicker. He'll rebound. He'll be fine in the future. Just a tough situation for him. All right, one more game to go, Bucky. Green Bay Packers, Washington Redskins, and this was a game, when you looked at it early on, looked like the Washington Redskins with Jordan Reed getting loose. This was going to kind of be their ball game. Aaron Rodgers out of rhythm, out of sync, but then the Packers started getting things worked out.
Yeah, they started getting things worked out, and the thing that we had talked about going into the game, they need to be able to run the ball, because when they've been on that one-dimensional approach, being able to having to force to throw the ball all over the yard, it hasn't worked out because their receivers have a tough time getting open. But what I saw in the second half in particular, they went up-tempo, were able to get in there 21 personnel, 2 backs, 1 tight end, run the football, grind it out with Eddie Lacy and James Starks, and because they were able to establish the run game, we saw them finally get to their identity. We saw them gain a little confidence, and I think this bodes well for them going into Arizona next week.
By the way, when I was watching this game, I could not figure out if James Starks was that fast or Eddie Lacy was that slow, because the difference between those two when they get in a football game, and I know Lacy pounded out some hard physical yards, but look at the burst you saw from James Starks. This looked like their previous Super Bowl run when he went out there and got hot in the postseason.
And then, it's about them getting hot. They still have Aaron Rodgers, the MVP. If they can run the football and balance it out, it makes it easy for Mike McCarthy to be able to call plays from the sideline. Also, using the quick counts, the up-tempo stuff really helped him. You see in the second half the dominance, being able to get it going. I like what Green Bay was able to do. I think this gives them something, a building block, something that they can build on going into the Arizona game. I know they got dominated in Week 16. I think this gives them some life, gives them a shot.
They better be able to run the ball against Arizona because they could not pass protect the previous time they met. But I will say overall the reason why the Washington Redskins lost was because of their trench play. I think when you look offensive line, they had a world of trouble trying to deal with Julius Peppers. We talked about it before, whether he was outside, whether he kicked inside. Nick Perry, that looked like USC Nick Perry. I haven't seen him play that well throughout his career. He was bull rushing the crud out of Trent Williams. And then you saw Clay Matthews get loose, not only coming off the edge, but on some of the games they ran. Their pass rush we saw finally get kicked up a little bit.
Yeah, finally had a chance to get kicked up. And part of the reason they would do that because they were to stop the run on early downs. Then you can see some of those exotic sub packages, some of those pressures they would bring. Clay Matthews is always in the mix. Julius Peppers coming around. Look, they have a team that is kind of built for the postseason in terms of being able to play in these 2- and 3-game stretches. Julius Peppers can turn back the clock and still be a factor. The young guys in the secondary, I was worried about Demarius Randall. I was worried about Quentin Rollins. They held up, gave those guys enough time to get home, and we saw them knock Kirk Cousins around a little bit.
Also, the offensive line as well for the Green Bay Packers. You touched on it. They were able to run the football, control the line of scrimmage, and then I thought in pass protection did a nice job. After the safety early on that they gave up, I thought Aaron Rodgers was getting the ball out, and they were a little bit better there, so hats off to their offensive line. We touched on it, though. Going to need to play even better if they're going to get by the Arizona Cardinals. All right, Bucky, that's the 4 playoff games, and now it's time to bring in our coach, Brian Billick.
All right, here are the favorite time of the Move the Six podcast, joined by Coach Billick. Coach Billick, it's just you and I. DJ had to run out because he's going to the national title game, so I'm going to handle this interview solo. How are you doing today?
Sounds good to me. DJ keeps flying on those frequent flyer mileage. He needs to actually pay for a ticket.
I know. Hey, Coach, I have to talk about Wild Card Weekend, and the thing that obviously stands out to me is the Pittsburgh-Cincinnati game. And so based on your experience coaching a team in Baltimore that's been kind of full of temperamental guys, talk about how you handle a team like the Cincinnati Bengals with all of those highly emotional and volatile players on the back end. Are you surprised to see them kind of melt down at the end of the game?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in that it was anticipated because of what had gone on before. You knew the emotions were going to be high. And you had to know that Marvin Lewis and Mike Tomlin spent all week long talking to their players, not about tamping down the passion or even the aggressive attitude. You want to be very careful before you reel that in on your team, but making sure they understand, guys, there's going to be consequences. So it's fine for you to go after it, but you got to be the one not to cross that line. You've got to be the one to be able to ratchet it back, to be under control so that it doesn't cost us. And obviously, Pittsburgh was able to do that and Cincinnati was not. And it is so sad because it was a heck of a game. Right up to the point that Vontaze Burfict tried to decapitate Antonio Brown. It was a classic playoff game in terms of, the backup quarterback and A.J. McCarron taking him the length of the field, and then the interception and the fumble, and Ben Roethlisberger pulling himself off his hospital bed and driving it down the field, and then the game just fell apart. You had to feel for Marvin Lewis and what was going on in Cincinnati, given the baggage they were taking in to begin with the label that you can't win a playoff game.
Coach, when you have a team like that, how important is it, or do you do this at all? Do you talk to your team constantly throughout the game to like, hey, let's make sure we understand situations. Let's play with the emotion, but understand where we are in this game. Do you have to constantly have those conversations?
Yeah, you're taking the pulse nonstop. And what I always want to do, I'm going to look in their eye. Are you under control? I understand you're worked up and you're slobbering and snot's coming out your nose and you're all, okay, that's cool. I get that because that's you play hard. But I want to look at you and know that you're under control. When I had Orlando Brown and remember all the issues that came with Orlando, and there were a lot of things, God rest his soul, going on in Orlando's head. And he was such a physical and big and passionate player. And so rather than reel that in and thinking that it was going to totally go away, Orlando and I had a relationship where I could look him in the eye and have an idea, are you under control? All right, can you really reel this back in, or all the histrionics you're going through? And I imagine Marvin has the same relationship with Vontaze Burfict, that you had to constantly read that, can you reel this back in? I understand you're worked up, that hypertension that you've got going, but obviously he could not, because Vontaze Burfict was out of control. And then obviously, and I'm not making excuses for Cincinnati, but it's not like Pittsburgh didn't go over the line either.
Yes.
Joey Porter had no business being on that field. And I'm not quite sure why the league isn't more aggressive in addressing why an assistant coach was on the field at that time.
Coach, and continuing the conversation about poise and coaching poise, Seattle was able to come back from a 9-0 deficit in the fourth quarter. You hear coaches always talk about finish, but in terms of poise and resiliency and grit, do you think those are qualities that can be developed by the coaching staff to the players, or do the players just have that in it? Is that something that you're always talking about?
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you can develop it, and Seattle has the pedigree. Now, whether that's because it's something that Pete Carroll works with specifically, or I tend to think more when you tend to win and you've won a championship, you obviously have come through these moments before. So Seattle as a team had stood at the abyss before and has come out of it in any number of instances to where they have a Super Bowl championship. They were in the Super Bowl last year. Now, Minnesota is still learning to do that. So where Seattle had the pedigree, and you got to give Minnesota credit, they should have won that game all but for a missed field goal. So we could have been talking today about how they, after being ahead for the most part of the game, and then Seattle coming back, Minnesota didn't blink. They drove the length of the field all but with a big pass interference call to aid it. And they would have developed it. But at the end of the day, Minnesota has not yet been there. And given the way the outcome of the game, they still aren't there.
Coach, and looking at some of these coaching searches, so now we've seen some teams eliminated, so some of their offensive and defensive coordinators are becoming hot candidates. Hue Jackson's name has been thrown out there as a hot candidate that should get a job. So if you could advise Hue Jackson on what to look for in either one of these opportunities or an ideal opportunity, what would you suggest?
Well, that's the unique thing about it. When you look at all the jobs that are available, Bucky, each one is its own set of circumstances. Clearly what the New York Giants are looking for, given the stability of that organization, the fact they're coming off a coach that had been there for 12 years with two Super Bowl rings, compared to what, say, a Cleveland Brown organization is looking for, which is an absolute mess. They fire their coaches, the last 4 or 5 coaches, after just a couple of years. They don't have a quarterback in place compared to a place like New York that has an Eli Manning, all but at 35 years old. Those are two different circumstances. So what a Hue Jackson or any coordinator, first, these jobs are hard to come by. So you got to be very careful about becoming too selective and passing up on a job. But clearly you'd like to see stable management. You'd like to see preferably have a quarterback in place. That is a big criteria in today's game. What is their cap situation? And exactly how do they view your relationship with the general manager, the director of personnel? How do you plan on doing that? These are all questions that you have to be comfortable with.
You know, Coach, one of the teams that kind of solved the question were the Miami Dolphins when they hired Adam Gase. Now, you talked about in that little piece right there, you talked about the importance of finding a quarterback. So when you go to Miami, you're Adam Gase. You have a talented yet inconsistent quarterback. What's the challenges of taking over and building a team around an established quarterback that hasn't necessarily played to the potential that many envisioned when he came into the league?
Well, you're exactly right. The scenario we were just talking about, when you go to the New York Giants, you've got a proven quarterback in Eli Manning. There's no question about it. You take the job in Miami because it does look like they have a good young quarterback in Tannehill, but there's some still questions about it. So Adam Gase had to look at this situation and decide and look at the film and decide, do I think Ryan Tannehill can be that guy? Because you came in and were obviously hired because of that background and that relationship you're now going to have with Ryan Tannehill. You kind of take ownership of him now. You can't come in and if it doesn't work out going, well, he wasn't my guy to begin with. I don't know that you have that latitude now, other than we look at the example in Washington. Obviously, when you look at Jay Gruden, he was hired to develop RG3. My guess is that when Dan Snyder sat down and Bruce Allen visited with Jay Gruden, Kirk Cousins' name never even came up. They hired him because they thought he could develop RG3. Well, he comes in and he decides, like Mike Shanahan, RG3 can't play. So I'm going with Kirk Cousins. Well, it turned out. So he took ownership of that decision. Well, it's kind of the same thing for Adam Gase now. He takes ownership of Ryan Tannehill because he had to sign off and saying, I want the job. I believe in Ryan Tannehill. I would imagine it would have been a different conversation had Adam Gase come in and say, no, I don't want a Ryan Tannehill. I don't think he can play. We need another quarterback. I'm not sure he'd been given the job. So, yeah, this is his guy now. And obviously, given his background, he feels very comfortable that he thinks Ryan Tannehill can take that next step under his tutelage.
You know, Coach, real quick one. Rex Ryan just appointed his brother Rob Ryan to come as the assistant head coach of defense. What do you think of that move overall, real quick?
Well, you know, I've hired my brother-in-law and Mike Smith, all but as the position coach. The difficulty, it's great. They're going to be back together. He's going to make a ton of money. Dennis Thurman is the one that's got to be going, okay, how's this going to work? Because now my boss's brother is going to be kind of my semi-boss, even though I'm still the defensive coordinator. If I'm Dennis Thurman, the defensive coordinator, that's a lot of voices in that meeting room when it comes to what you're doing defensively. Yeah, it could be great. He's obviously a great coach, would be great another perspective, but I think Dennis Thurman's job just got a whole lot more difficult.
It certainly has become more difficult. Coach, I look forward to reading your article this week. What are you going to talk about this week, maybe on your
I'm going to take your suggestion. I appreciate it. I'm going to write about what it's like to have to play a team that you previously played during the regular season and now play them in the playoffs. 3 of the 4 games have rematches from during the regular season.
Can't wait to read it. We'll catch you next week, Coach.
Sounds great.
All right, so that kind of finishes the Move the Sticks podcast. My partner is not here to say goodbye, but DJ and I will catch up at the championship game tonight. Make sure you check out all of the Move the Sticks podcast content on iTunes, also YouTube. Make sure you give us that thumbs up. We need it.
Thanks for downloading Move the Sticks with Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks. For more, go to nfl.com/podcasts.